Good morning, everyone. We are not working. Apparently, the microphones are not working, guys. How are we going up the back with the sound check? We are working now. We are working. I see a lot of thumbs, a few rude fingers, but mainly thumbs. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Friday. Apparently, we have concluded, according to most. It's Thursday or Friday? It's Thursday. Yes, no, it is Thursday today. Thursday, the 10th of December 1992, because apparently that is when negotiators think they are, according to last night's rabble-rousing 60-plus intervention plenary that we had last night, which was wonderful to watch. It seems that we are now at a place where there is more coordination than ever before on our differences, which is great to see. So we had a lovely plenary last night that went until about a little over 1 a.m. We also had a number of negotiations which continued until what I understand to be 4 or 5 a.m. in bilateral meetings last night. Josh was in most of those meetings and will be telling you exactly what happened according to his understanding, but we have some political understanding updates for you as well as we can do considering the lateness of those meetings. We also have Tierney Smith with us, who's going to give you the communications wrap-up. Of course, a lot of the media was covering, I guess, some of the disputes over the new text that we received yesterday at 3, and I'm sure Tierney's going to be kind of updating you on everything that was going on in the media, on her Facebook page, particularly, and coming out of her Twitter handles, and some of your Snapchat updates as well, I understand. So thank you so much for joining us again for the Thursday. As you'll see very shortly, we have a smaller live audience here because I believe many people were watching the negotiations until very, very late last night. For those at home, you should be able to be watching a lot of the plenaries that are being screened at the moment. The next plenary we have is scheduled for 3 p.m. this afternoon, and that will be coming to you live from the UNFCCC site. And for all of those in the negotiations right now, I'm sure you've been enjoying all the festivities just as much as I have. I'm going to be crossing over live to Joshua Wiese now. Josh, we saw a lot of, we saw a new text yesterday, and then we saw a lot of dispute over the new text. What did you kind of read out of yesterday's new text release, and I guess then the plenary and the negotiations that pursued?
So I think we're at a point where we've convinced parties that this is a long-term thing, that there's pieces of this deal that are going to help us continue to revisit these pledges going forward again and again, that it's a long-term architecture. And I've heard from people analyzing the interventions, all of those interventions last night, that what we might be seeing is almost a pushback against that. So we have this long-term deal, and parties are almost scared or nervous to lock in anything that they almost see as a forever or a 30-year-long agreement. And there's a risk that what comes out of that, the response to that fear, is that we get something very minimal and basic, and that we don't get the ambition that we need, we don't get the clarity around finance that we need, that we don't actually get the tools to build on these national climate action plans and achieve the goals that we hope to see in the final text, getting to stabilized temperatures at less than 1.5 degrees, so decarbonization by mid-century. We did see some areas of progress, so ambition options on the global temperature goal and operational mitigation goal. New COP decision text sets 2020 or 2021 is the next substantial political moment when countries will submit or revise their INDCs for 2030. And importantly, there is sort of lack of clarity on the relationship between this 2018, some people say 2019 facilitative dialogue, and the new INDCs. But that 2018 year we're hearing for this dialogue on the INDCs is really crucial for in bigger context with long-term agreement, fears, or whatever you want to call it aside. We did see this text shrink a lot. We saw clarity again around the periphery. So I think there is positive motion, but some fights that maybe we didn't expect. There's sort of a big discussion going on. We heard in the interventions about who's the most vulnerable. So we heard a lot of countries talk about how SIDS need special status, and others think that the LDCs need special status more so perhaps. And I think it's clear that we are in a era where all of these countries, there are more vulnerable countries, that's expanding. So again, with this long-term architecture that we're building, countries want to make sure that they're in a position to receive the support that they'll need to deal with climate impacts. So differentiation, finance, the things that have been dogging us throughout this week, they went to 5 a.m. discussing in Daba, where they have the sort of head of delegation there, and all of the blocs, individual parties. And at the same time, these pieces that are that we did see some progress on, loss of damage, and lots of others, they had a parallel in Daba, also going to 5 a.m. And I think the read from most of the people in that meeting were that they made no progress in those meetings. So really frustrated that they worked through the night, made no progress, and that could be a strategy where it gives a little more credibility to Fabio's coming in with some more sort of sweeping suggestions for bringing parties together. So if they've talked out all of their issues, they feel like they're not resolvable, they may empower him to take some bigger steps beyond what they've been willing to do in these sort of party-by-party interventions. It's a mess, and I don't think that we're going to see a quick resolution. I think there were some people who suggested that by today we'd have a final draft that would get forward to this legal committee. And
some people, I believe Fabius was one of those people.
He was certainly pushing for it. So I don't know if any of you have gotten in on a sort of a pool for the end of this thing, but if you picked Thursday, you might be losing some money. Prepared for a late night, and I think the ministers are prepared for it to be more than just one late night. So it's looking at the moment pretty locked up. Lastly, I'm hearing a sense from our partners or people who are thinking about strategies for the rest of the session of how we can intervene. Same as yesterday, just pushing the things that we think are our key asks. So anything that you've come here to advocate that you feel is really important, you still have some hours to influence that, and in particular, by making that your line by which you'll measure the outcome of this session. So a sense of kind of things could fall apart. It's sort of typical. It's part of this process. We always get to that point at this stage, but it's real. And a few hours to make your calls heard for where you'd like to see this thing get stronger. And a long wait.
There we go. What an insightful political update from Josh this morning.
Brilliant.
Well, in case you didn't know that yourself, and you want to catch up on the negotiations, on the screens behind me, so unfortunately those watching at home might not see it, we're sharing some of the work by the Climate Tracker team, who put together a live infographic of the negotiations last night, and there was also a live infographic produced of the textual changes in the text that we saw yesterday as well. So while it seems that there is not the best kind of insight from inside the negotiations this morning, you can go to the climatetracker.org website and you can see for yourself the two different kind of infographics that were produced, highlighting the interventions made last night by negotiators, as well as highlighting the textual changes from the second into the third text. For those watching the screen, we can see a lot of different interesting interventions and a lot of different points that came out. Obviously, gender, human rights, forests and the kind of differentiation of vulnerability, as well as 1.5 for me came out as kind of key topics that negotiators were discussing. Tierney, just as a top line before we kind of get more in depth, in the media, did they pick up on any of these kind of key disputes that were happening in the interventions last night, or was it kind of just a more broader scope of just a general kind of discord between negotiators?
Well, I think with the lateness of how long they stayed in the negotiations post deadlines have passed by that point, so I don't think the coverage is particularly focused too much on what was said necessarily between countries last night, but it is looking at the text, and it is trying to look at what still remains the big issues, the divisions over the bracketed text, and looking into issues such as loss and damage, differentiation, finance, ambition, everything that Josh has sort of already mentioned. I think there was a bit of scrambling by journalists as the text was released yesterday to try and dig in and understand what it was. And I think sort of a lot of help from some of our partners and stuff to decipher that for them. So yeah, at the moment it was still a lot of focus on the text, but I'm sure today a lot more will get into where we're at and some of the dividing lines between different countries, particularly as if we are having a bit of a long wait until we potentially have anything else on the table. Journalists will be here for their coverage, and so I think we'll focus a lot more on what countries are saying.
That's great, Tierney. Thanks for that. And for those of you who were, I guess, kind of inside the negotiations, we're going to cross live to the audience now. And for those watching at home, understand that many in this audience might be a little bit tired, as they may have been kind of watching live or online till late hours of the night. But let's kind of cross into the audience, and we'll do our regular kind of understanding of how people interpreted different things. Now, our Brazilian colleagues just here. Last night, obviously Brazil is kind of one of the facilitators at the moment of these negotiations. And last night, I don't remember Brazil making a specific intervention, as well as kind of another, I guess, reputable country being the US, not making an intervention. Was that, do you think, a strategic move for Brazil not to make any statements, or is there some things kind of going on that maybe I don't know about?
Actually, Brazil made a statement at 5 a.m., but it had no content really good on, so that's the only update. We have another update as well. Okay, we have a quick taxifying jobs proposal. So please.
Okay, I don't really know what's going on right now, but it seems that there is a proposal to... okay, for those watching live right now, there is a considerable amount of potentially assault going on here on Human Rights Day. It seems that I have seen 5 different women approach and for those lucky enough to be in the room, you just witnessed something quite interesting. For those watching online, I think fortunate for you, you didn't have to see that.
Can we have the Brazilians explain the theory of change behind their intervention?
So that was probably making up for the lack of interventions from Brazil last night, I understand.
Yeah, Brazil needed to be more sexified as well. So 2 years ago, we gave Josh an award. Now he's one of the most sexified guys here. So we wanted to highlight this and show him how important he is for the sexified.
Yeah, my award was least sexified 2 years ago. So I think that's what's behind it.
Thank you, Josh, for all the work that you have been done for youth and the Adopt a Negotiator project.
Thanks for going.
All right, well, that was a lovely way to start the morning. Let's see if we have any other kind of updates from around the room. Are there anyone else who was kind of in the negotiations or watching and has something particular they want to kind of highlight from what was going on last night? I might cross over to some of the climate trackers who are watching. Tizan, you are part of the team that was making the live infographic of the negotiations, but you're also from, the IOSIS and SIDS region. What did you take out of from some of the interventions from IOSIS negotiators last night? Do you think there was some sort of unity and there was kind of a general sense of understanding among SIDS countries, or do you think there's a lot of division there?
Hi everyone. I think that what I noticed is that a lot of these SIDS and USS countries are supporting one another with regards to the 1.5 goal particularly, and the need for loss and damage to be included separately.
And Josh mentioned that one of the key aspects of their interventions collectively were the requirement to treat SIDS as a separate vulnerability category, if you like, so more vulnerable than other countries. Do you think that's a valid claim? And if so, do you think that that's going to kind of get much success for the rest of the week?
I think also that that was something that stood out to me, that a lot of the countries are recognizing that SIDS and LDCs have special circumstances and special vulnerabilities that need to be taken into consideration.
Tizan, can you talk a little bit about what the state of loss and damage is? And I mean, we hear a lot about the U.S., for example, saying loss and damage. Other countries, seems like from maybe an outsider perspective that the support is there, but from an insider perspective, I think that there's it's a lot more of a murky picture. So can you talk about why the big push? Have we not already gotten certainty or at least confidence that loss and damage is going to land in the agreement?
Loss and damage is there, but it's very vague and it's not stated strongly enough, and there doesn't the commitment to it seems to me to be very just like on a surface level. So they need to address it more and address it with regard to finance.
And we're hearing that the U.S. in particular is they want something included that excludes liability specifically, right? And that it's a red line to have this in the text without language that basically takes developed countries off the hook for any financial support or any liability for having caused these climate impacts in the first place. So I think that's one of the big controversial issues.
Sure. Thank you very much for Tizan, and I'm guessing that's going to be a key, focus for a lot of negotiators and negotiations over the next couple of weeks, figuring out which country in particular is potentially classified as more vulnerable than others, and also figuring out how loss and damage fits into the finance scope, the adaptation scope, and even the idea that it should be on its own as well. You also have an update?
Just related to the liability parts, because after the negotiations at night, we had the chance to meet with one of the member states, and he mentioned that despite that liability is not mentioned, the developed countries are not happy, and they want to actually mention the text that liability shall never be an issue. Like the word never should be mentioned in the text itself. That was one of the updates from the negotiation.
Okay, thank you for that. And we also have an update from here.
Yeah, I would just mention that it's really important to keep an eye on these discussions around which countries are more vulnerable. I was there during the negotiations for the last 2 weeks, the Sustainable Development Goals, and that wasn't really an issue. But in the last few days, it really blew up, and there was a massive standoff between the LDCs and the SIDS, and the representative of the LDCs was almost refusing to sign if SIDS were included in the same part as that. So hopefully that doesn't happen, and hopefully some of those differences have been resolved. But as things go late and tensions flare, we really hope we don't see developing countries turn on each other in terms of fighting for that level of vulnerability. So keep an eye on that.
I guess from some people from outside that might be quite confusing. So LDCs being the least developed countries, SIDS being the small island developing states. But many of the small island developing states are in themselves least developed countries. So how do you kind of interpret that difference and that crossover? And do you think they're talking about individual countries in particular who might be, I guess, more developed SIDS countries that they're worried about?
Yeah, it becomes confusing because there's a lot of overlap between the groups. And in the SDGs, there was also specific groups for landlocked developing countries as well. So all sorts of overlap, and it became quite confusing. And I think what came through in the SDGs was the significance of personalities, certain leaders within groups, particularly whoever got to speak on behalf of the group. I know during the SDGs, it was the PR from Benin, who a lot of people started to realize that he was coming very strong, almost to his own view, and it may not have been representative of the group. So again, it's also unsure when a group is speaking how representative that is. And so strong personalities, particularly late in the night, I feel, can come to the fore, which may be helpful or hindrance depending on what that personality is like.
Definitely. And it sounds like you in particular from New Zealand, right? And I guess yesterday, I don't remember New Zealand making an intervention. We saw interventions from some of their close colleagues and allies in Canada and in Australia, for example. What do you think New Zealand's, I guess, perspective on this new text is? Do you see any kind of red lines that New Zealand would be worried about right now?
I mean, I think New Zealand, on a national interest basis, is focusing on carbon markets and land use, but I'm not sure it really holds out very strongly with any really red lines. It kind of likes to hide more within the group, and it also knows that as it kind of gets to the end game, that its kind of direct influence is going to be sort of decreasing and will probably more channel its energy trying to influence some of its more powerful allies rather than trying to stake out a strong position for itself. So it will be kind of more in the background for I suspect, so I'm not surprised to see them not taking the floor.
I guess geographically, with New Zealand being in the Pacific and being so close with many of its Pacific neighbours, do you think it might throw its weight behind this suggestion that SIDS should be considered particularly vulnerable?
Yes, I was on the New Zealand delegation for the SDGs, and it's exactly what we did. Is we tried to really throw a weight behind SIDS, particularly Pacific nations, and trying to rally them to kind of really stand up to that move by the LDCs that I mentioned. I mean, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But I haven't seen, the UNFCCC New Zealand put itself out there as much for SIDS as it did during the SDGs, so I'm not really sure where they'll come out on that.
Very interesting. It looks like there could be some unique perspectives coming out in the next couple of days, and perhaps some of those divides could be settled maybe by some kind of other countries playing a role as well. It looks like you've got some great information on your screen, but it looks like you have an update for us as well.
Yeah, so I haven't been to the late night meetings, but I know concerning all the SIDS and LDCs, Africa is also unhappy because they want to be added to the list of vulnerable countries. They're saying that if we mention LDCs and SIDS, then Africa should be added too, so it has one to the list of fights.
And on that Africa question, I guess kind of least developed countries, they're categorized by, a GDP rate. The SIDS are categorized by kind of the population size and a kind of geography of their member states being small islands. But with Africa as a group, it doesn't necessarily have one of those more kind of convenient characterizations as a group. And it actually involves a number of countries that potentially some people would be very worried if they were categorized as particularly vulnerable, right?
Yeah, I don't really know why. Well, it's countries that are not least developed countries, such as I think Ivory Coast, which is not the LDC, which have an interest in fighting for that because they want to receive money too. Basically, that's it. They want to have the money. I don't know. For me, it's an issue too. I don't know how they're going to solve it.
But I guess also you're not mentioning the two kind of big economic heavyweights of Africa. You're not mentioning South Africa, Nigeria, even kind of countries like Botswana who have seen kind of incredible economic growth over the last couple of years. Do you think, I guess, kind of the call for Africa to be considered will be maybe undermined by people looking at South Africa and Nigeria and saying, their levels of economic development don't necessarily kind of cross over with the LDCs or the SIDS?
Yeah, I agree with you. I have no vision on how other people react. I just know that they're pushing for that, and it's one of their red lines. But I don't know why. I don't know how it's going to be solved.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess kind of what I'm not mentioning here is, obviously the high levels of inequality and poverty that also exist in Nigeria and South Africa and many of these kind of other African countries as well. So there is definitely a human rights case to be made, and probably very hard decisions to be made there as well. We have an update from the front of the floor, I believe from a Canadian perspective, or...
And a Pakistan perspective. Yeah, I'm on the Canadian youth delegation. And I was at the session yesterday, and there seemed to be a resistance from India to 1.5, which I think stems from right to develop, and which I thought was really interesting. I think that was probably the only country that showed resistant to 1.5, and there were lots of references that I haven't seen before to implementation and the compliance architecture, and I think that plays into really demanding aspects of things that the INDCs that countries are agreeing to. And I think overall there seems to be a lot of optics around consensus. When they were in the session, there was a lot of, let's get this done. This is a good draft, let's work on this. We all want to go home. But I think behind the scenes, like finance is really very, very contentious still, and also how the finance mechanisms interact with the technology mechanisms. There's issues of intellectual property rights. Developed countries don't really want to share. Australia, Canada, US don't really want to share their technology or compel their corporations to share carbon technologies with the developing world. And I think it interacts with things like TPP as well. And I think we should just like camp outside the negotiations and lobby our negotiators for our countries separately, because this is the fight of our generation. And I'm trying to talk to as many negotiators as possible and see where the hurdles are. Maybe if we can have more coordinated lobbying in the last few hours, maybe we can make a difference.
Let's just dive into some of those aspects a little bit closer. You mentioned kind of the 1.5 resistance. I saw in kind of a press conference yesterday that India was mentioning, okay, 1.5 potentially, but we need this kind of massive support of finance. We need a massive kind of push from developed countries. Do you think, I guess, around this 1.5 language, particularly from, I guess, maybe an Indian or a Pakistani perspective, do you think that there are some countries who kind of look at this 1.5 language that we now have with a lot of suspicion and concern that potentially, we haven't got the means of implementation, or I guess the signs of implementation on the table?
I think that it stems from who's responsible for the 1.5, and also it's sort of a bargaining chip. It's a bargaining chip because so many countries have now signed on to 1.5 or have declared support of media for 1.5, and it's become a hot issue. I think for some countries it's becoming a bargaining chip for finance, and I think it's playing into that sort of, if you give us money, then we reduce our emissions. If you give us the technology, etc.
And just finally, today is Human Rights Day. It's 67 years since the Universal Declaration on Human Rights was initially signed. And that was one of the kind of the key UN declarations, one of the very early kind of international mobilizations around a common goal. Do you think that yesterday we saw kind of Canada come out with a lot of support for Indigenous and human rights, but there was a lot of countries who didn't support it. Do you think that human rights could be another contentious issue over the next couple of days?
I think that the main conversation yesterday in the main session was including all the things that were taken out from Article 2 and left in the preamble. So I think the conversation now is the preamble includes most of what we've been asking for, intergenerational equity, gender, rights of occupied people, Indigenous people, or peoples, because apparently there's legal implications if it's people versus peoples. But I think the main conversation is whether it should be included back into Article 2. A lot of countries advocated including it and reverting back to the original text. And there was a very powerful statement that Venezuela made, which was, I just want to go home and look my daughter in the eye and tell her that everything's going to be okay. And that was pretty much most of their statement. So I saw a huge, quite a lot more conversation on human rights. A lot of countries pushing for that. In Canada, reiterated its support for the Indigenous rights text in the text, but not clear on whether they were asking for it to be in the operating text or in the preamble.
All right, well, that's been a pretty significant update this morning. Is there anyone else with particular intelligence that they have from the negotiations, particularly if you have any updates on what pursued in the morning? We had the guidance of Louisa yesterday. I might pick on her again, just in case she's been able to check her inbox this morning and has anything that's useful there. Was there anything interesting in your inbox this morning, Louisa?
I heard about lots of fights overnight, which is not a great thing to wake up to. I think the point that was raised about making sure that we try and talk to as many of our individual delegations as possible is really, really important, because I think there is this within the big groups, we're not able to express always the different interests that we're seeing within them. So, I think some of that is starting to come out. So, for example, the High Ambition Coalition press conference, which was pretty hilarious to watch all these different people sitting and saying, I am high ambition, I am also high ambition. But the things that I found actually interesting from that was to hear countries talk about, yes, they may have oil dependencies, but actually they're recognizing their vulnerability. So they recognize the need to shift and to change. So I think more and more countries are recognizing that actually working in slightly different alliances than perhaps just these traditional lines can help them actually serve the interests of their citizens and their countries. So I think really talking to kind of your individual countries is really helpful, because it seems like overnight there was just a lot of restating the same positions. I think there's everyone is still loving Fabius, the French convener of all of this, but I think it will be really tough to see how that translates into a text. So I think, actually bringing the voices of young people and campaigners to say this is what really matters, this counts, as we go from this weird translation between kind of diplomatic speak into legalese in the text. I think it's really important to remember what actually matters, and particularly like you were mentioning about what do we need to deliver 1.5, what do we need to deliver solidarity, not just express it, and then it's kind of this in the text itself.
And one of the key members of the High Ambition Coalition is the US. And we saw John Kerry in his press conference yesterday kind of talk about climate change as the greatest economic opportunity for his country in particular, and kind of talk about his additional finance pledges as hopefully trying to spur on not only kind of the ability for vulnerable countries to be less vulnerable, but potentially also spur on some of this kind of economic opportunity that he's trying to promote now. Do you see that as being like a positive shift and potentially something that could spell out like quite a significant move from the US over the next couple of days, or do you see that just kind of as a rhetoric move to support some of the I guess criticism back home?
I think that the embrace of kind of low carbon as not a political risk but more a political opportunity is useful. I think there's multiple different motivations for taking action on climate change and moving to a clean energy system. And what's been weird being involved in the UN climate process for a few years is how little people generally talk about energy or renewable energy, and I feel like that has really shifted this year with these kind of core demands for 100% renewables and clean energy, which is really exciting. And I think that makes it easier for me to talk to my friends about caring about what I do. still have high ambition options on the table with kind of less than 48 hours to go is a result of getting way more voices involved and campaigning, and not seeing COP as the end point, but seeing that this is something we can use. It's a way, we can have hooks, but actually when we go home, that means it's something else to hold our governments to account, but also something to spur on more community renewable energy projects, or to spur on more green job creation. So, it's seeing it in the broader sense, and I think that's a good thing to connect climate and energy policy up.
Thanks so much, Louisa. Always worthy coming over and having a chat. I'm going to have a chat with one of my other favourite Londoners, who is sitting eagerly behind. Oh, now, Tierney, you didn't get assaulted by multiple kisses this morning, but you did probably get assaulted by multiple emails and media updates overnight. What were they saying, and were they kind of worth reading?
Definitely worth reading, particularly if you're trying to get your heads around the process a little bit. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of coverage looking at where we're at, what is in the new text, what is still to be debated in the new text, that kind of dominated things. Also got a lot of coverage on John Kerry's speech yesterday and his announcement on funding. And what was quite interesting is some of our US colleagues who've been monitoring the media there said that actually what was a strange one is a lot of the focus in the US media today is on things like transparency and the ratchet up mechanism, but actually finance has completely dropped off the agenda there now that Kerry's made his speech. So that's a bit strange, but it might come back if there's more battles over finance. Indian media still seems to be focusing a little bit on sort of criticism of the process, but at the same time, they are sort of starting to talk a little bit more about the potential for a positive way forward and a positive outcome at the end, which is a little bit of a shift to what we're seeing earlier on in the week. 1.5 is also increasingly dominating news articles. There's an awful lot of news articles. There's mention of 1.5, so that's definitely getting a lot more traction now, and I think a lot of that is thanks to all the work that everyone here has put into kind of making that an issue this week. And we're also seeing certain countries talking about, certain news organisations talking about what countries might be blocking the process. Particularly Saudi Arabia is still coming up a lot. But again, in the US, while some of the focus is on that, a lot of the US media has kind of fallen back into the whole India and China's kind of narrative. I guess the other sort of positive thing to say, which is coming out in a lot of news organisations, is how different we are now from where we were in Copenhagen. So sort of completely different times, not trying to compare it, not saying that we're going to get another Copenhagen, but actually looking at the difference between how we are now and where we were then. So that's a definite positive sort of media pick up there. Just a little bit of a sense that this is going to go down to the wire. And so a lot of journalists, I think, are looking ahead at the coming days and potentially some long days and some long nights, as I think many of us are. So just sort of shifting to some of the stuff that we've got coming up today. Following on from Louise's point about how making Paris the moment is not the end, it's going to help us further drive our demands when we go back home. 350 and Greenpeace have got a press conference at 11:30 following an action that they're going to have by the Eiffel Tower at 11:10, which is all about that. It's kind of launching their launch platform into what they're doing next year. So it's looking at the end of fossil fuels and continuing that fight into the new year. We also have a few coalition of NGOs doing a press conference. There's one at 10:30, so we've already missed it, but if you want to watch it back, that could be an interesting one. I had it down as Oxfam, but I just got an email that says that there's a few different NGO CEOs that are going to be talking about where we're at. We've also got the daily download from CAN at 11. They're going to be looking very big picture at what's going on in the negotiations so far, but they're also going to be drilling down on the legal issues and the idea of the legal form of the agreement, which could be very useful because I know that I don't 100% have my head around it, so it could be useful for other people. At 1:30 we have WWF International, and then at 7:30 we have scheduled a CAN France press conference, which will hopefully give a little bit more context into the role that France is playing in all of this. Less country far scheduled today, which you would obviously kind of expect, but I think if that could change rapidly if as things develop. So just kind of keep an eye out for what's coming. But I think that's everything that I had on my schedule.
Wonderful. That was a pretty conclusive wrap up, and I hope you're all kind of enjoying these wrap ups that we have from Josh and Tierney. We're going to be back again tomorrow with what we hope will be a more optimistic outlook on how we're going to approach the final days. If not, it sounds like the Brazilians will be here again, and maybe they can all make us feel better again tomorrow if we need it. So I may have to call on them once again for some light entertainment, and I'll let you know there. May call on them privately. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us these last 2 weeks. We have quite a bit of work to do around the world, and especially those people who are here. We have a lot of lobbying to get done. We have a lot of kind of needs to support these countries who are obviously in a very, very divided spot right now, and we need to kind of try and find some unity between them. In order to do that, you all need to rush off, grab a lot of coffees, probably store some croissants for the day and maybe for the afternoon, and get kind of a storage bin of essential foods and glucose for a while. There is free coffee at the German pavilion. I highly recommend it, even though the staff aren't always the happiest. But other than that, have a great day, and I will see you all tomorrow.